Hello everyone. The Culture and Identity Roundtable would like to present the types of privilege that exist in Japan, the United States, and in military organizations. I am Chihiro, and these are my group members, Ririko and Tsuyoshi from the Japan side, and Sachi, Chelsea, and Michael from the American side. Before we start, I would like to make a disclaimer. This presentation is done for the sole purpose of presenting the ideas that came up during the Culture and Identity RT discussions. Therefore, we ask you to challenge the ideas that were brought up in the presentation, but not the person.
In beginning our presentation, I would like to pose a question. What do you think about when you hear of the word privilege? Mr. Black and Mr. Stone tells us it is 1, our particular advantage for limited people. 2, something granted to someone not as a result of a hard work, which means 3, it can be used to benefit its owners and exclude others, but also 4, it is hard to recognize what you have actually works as a privilege, as it is usually one of the elements you take for granted.
By understanding privilege, you can gain a sense of knowledge about your social status. In doing so, you'd recognize unprivileged people in your society. Through this process, you'd develop a better understanding of the social or cultural structure that you live in. However, one thing you should notice is that privilege is not an absolute or objective one. Rather, it is often defined in terms of the relative relations with others. Therefore, it might be risky or impossible to determine a universal definition of privilege. So from now, we're going to discuss how privilege is different in Japan and the US.
We have been discussing in our group what kinds of elements can shape our identity. And for Japan, this was language, while for America, this was race. I will first explain language privilege. Referring to the dictionary meaning, privilege here is regarded as something most people in the same social group don't have. So for the native Japanese people, it is privileged to be fluent in languages other than Japanese. For example, English, Chinese, Spanish, and others. But for foreign people living in Japan, it is privileged to be fluent in Japanese. So this is actually difficult to compare because of its difference in its meanings. While native Japanese people can gain advantage on being able to communicate with people from abroad, foreign people have the need to interact with the Japanese in order to get necessary information. Therefore, for analysis, we concluded it is actually nearly impossible to generalize the definition of the word privilege, even in a relatively homogeneous country like Japan.
As for privilege in America, our roundtable thought that race may be the most important aspect. As can be seen in the graph, according to Pew Research Center, Americans generally think being white is an advantage in society, while about half or more say being Black or Hispanic hurts people's ability to get ahead. Known as white privilege, this form of privilege influences other important aspects of privilege, including but not limited to education level, income, housing, and health. One reason race is considered a privilege in America is because of its history. Systemic discrimination had been a part of American culture since its inception, as can be seen in the history of enslavement. Additionally, prior to the civil rights movement in the 1960s, it was legal in many areas to discriminate and segregate between white people and people of color. The effects of such systemic differences linger today in the form of income, education, living location, etc., as well as people's perceptions. However, we have been seeing changes over the past 60 years, implying that white privilege may eventually be replaced by another form of privilege.
So far, we've summarized what privileges are, but next we would like to introduce privileges in the military of Japan and the United States. This is because we thought that an unusual process of forming privileges might occur under special circumstances.
Women's empowerment within the military is important to push. Serving in the U.S. military from the Revolutionary War to the present, servicewomen have proved to be an essential asset to national defense and peacekeeping at home and abroad. Acting as 14% of the U.S. military, servicewomen deserve equal standing with their servicemen peers.
However, there are still some issues in the Japanese and American military. As for the Japanese self-defense forces, women generally tend to be promoted later than men because it's necessary to leave the workplace due to marriage or childbirth. Therefore, due to the peculiarities of missions, there is no choice but to choose whether the job or childcare in order to play an active role in the self-defense forces. In addition, there is still a problem for women to be able to carry out the tasks that the men have been carrying out until now. The Japanese and the US military have officially announced that they have opened up all their jobs to women, but there are still physically high standards to enter the units, and we don't have enough facilities and know-how for women. Finally, this is not an institutional issue, but a matter of personal emotion. It seems that there are still many people in the self-defense forces who oppose female commanders. I guess it's common for male subordinates to make ill of female officers.
The largest challenges we have within the U.S. military to reaching equality are sexual assault/harassment, lack of sufficient representation, and blatant sexism. Whether we look at the Lackland, Texas Air Force Base scandal, where military training instructors assaulted and harassed at least 49 servicewomen, the recent abuse and death of Vanessa Guillen, or the 3% increase in sexual assault cases within the U.S. military from 2018 to 2019, which was reported to affect women disproportionately, it is clear that sexual abuse of women is a large barrier to equality within the U.S. military. Many servicewomen tend to hold administrative positions in the military rather than combat or STEM roles, leading to a clear lack of representation. This gap can be a product of two items. First, it was until recently that certain combat positions within the U.S. military were barred to women. Up until President Obama's administration, women had been excluded from some frontline combat positions officially. For example, special operations and law enforcement positions see a lack of female recruits, such as diving in the U.S. Navy or the military police in the Air Force. The lack of representation within special operations and law enforcement may discourage a woman from participating or entering the programs. Second, women tend to serve in less combat-oriented branches of the military, such as the Air Force or the Navy, which offer more combat positions. For example, the Air Force is colloquially referred to as the Chair Force due to its more desk-type labor. The U.S. Army, and especially the Marines, contain much less servicewomen. Though there are equal opportunity programs that are pushed heavily to promote gender equality within the military, integration programs cannot change the mindsets of those in the military. These mindsets could be attributed to sexism within the military that deems women as less capable than their male counterparts. Hostile sexism, which shows itself as crude humor and discriminatory slurs, is rampant among servicemen. Benevolent sexism, where sexism is masked as positive actions, often portraying women as needy individuals unable to support themselves, is also an issue. This sexism itself contributes to the lack of representation and sexual assault of servicewomen. As long as sexism in all forms is a part of military culture, it contributes to the denigration and discrimination against women that so heavily weighs on our servicewomen. It is through our research and opinion that male privilege is intertwined with military culture. Though the values of gender equality have spread amongst the military in recent years, gender inequality is a very real issue amongst contemporary military services.
In order to hear the opinions of other JASCers, we conducted a survey that asked them about the keywords they think of when they think about privilege. As can be seen from the graph, there are many people that think wealth and education level is important. Looking more closely at the results, education level was the most important aspect in Japan, and language came in second. For the American side, wealth has the most people and race comes next.
From the poll we took, we found that some kinds of privilege are more obvious, therefore more popular. We also found that more noticeable aspects of privilege may also be the results of others. Regarding our individual research, we found that perceptions of privilege tend to be fluid and that privilege differs based on environmental factors such as the nation, industry, etc. Thank you for listening. The floor is open for Q&A.